Hello, audio testing. Testing audio 1, 2, 3. Just doing an audio test, making sure the microphone is working properly. right. Get situated here. How's everybody doing? We're going to give people a few more minutes to get here, but just wanted to switch over here so that you can see my pretty face, and I can talk to you a little bit here as we're waiting for people to arrive. So my name is Dan, and I'm kind of curious who's here watching the live stream. So while we're waiting for people to come, if you don't mind typing into the chat maybe where you're coming from and maybe a little bit about your experience, like do you know Adobe apps like Photoshop or Illustrator? In the past, have you or currently have you ever used Quark Express? Also, just a couple housekeeping things. I will be trying to keep an eye on the chat as we're going through the live stream. So if you have questions, feel free to ask as we're going through. I understand you might want to go full screen just so that you can get the best viewing experience, but there is like a little bar button down below the video if you're on a desktop where you can make the video bigger, but the chat is still visible down on the bottom. So that might also be kind of a nice in-between if you still want to have the video big and also participate in the chat. As we're going through, if people ask questions, I do try to answer it during the live stream if it makes sense to answer at that moment. If for some reason I miss your question or if I just didn't think it was appropriate to cover at that moment, feel free to ask at the end. We'll have some time for Q&A at the end. And we have a question in the chat. Do we record this? We're on YouTube. So yes, YouTube records this. And this will be posted to our YouTube channel, which is a reminder that if you want to have an easy way to access our videos and get notifications of new videos, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. There's a subscribe button down below the video, so you can subscribe to the channel and then you'll get notifications about it. But we'll also email everybody a link to watch the recording. So yes, it will become a YouTube video. When we are kind of done with this, we'll do a little bit of editing and cut off this first part where we're just kind of chatting before the official training gets started, and so we'll publish it like probably early next week. It'll become a video, and we'll send you all a link to it. So I think just another minute or two, and then we'll be getting started. Oh, I noticed another question. Are we going to show you how to make business cards? We'll show you the stuff you would need to create a business card. You would just have to put in the specific business card size and put in your text and put in your graphics. So I'm not going to be specifically demonstrating a business card, but all the tools that I showed today would be applicable to a business card. You just have to make your document the right size. So I think just another minute for letting people get in here. If it looks like I'm staring off into space, it's because I've got two monitors, and the video camera that I have is right on the main monitor. And if I'm looking up, it's actually because I'm looking at the chat. So I have to kind of look like I'm staring into space to look at the chat. Just means I'm trying to see what you guys are saying. So yeah, so most of today will be a live demonstration of me using InDesign, showing you how the stuff works, and we'll switch over to doing a screen share once I officially kick it off, once we're just kind of done waiting for people to arrive. A couple things about quality. YouTube does kind of figure out what the best optimal quality is for your internet connection, but sometimes if it goes down to a lower quality than you'd prefer, you can adjust that. There's a little gear icon down at the bottom right of the video, and you can click on that to adjust your quality if you don't like the one that YouTube chose for you. Keep in mind, if you choose too high of a quality for your internet connection, it might stutter. So you'll have to either just let YouTube figure that out for you, or be aware that you might have to adjust it back and forth if you want to have control. If you're watching this on a mobile device, then if you tap on the video, there should be like a 3-dot icon at the top right, and you can tap on that for more options. And in there's a gear that you can check on for quality. So you can tap on the gear, and then you can change the quality there. But like I said, for most people, just the default streaming quality should be fine. We're streaming in basically high definition. We're streaming in a Retina quality, so it's there as long as you have the internet speed to download it. All right, so I think we're done waiting for people to arrive. So so I'm going to kind of pretend that this part didn't happen, and for the official recording that we're going to be posting on YouTube, I'm going to trim off this previous stuff so people don't have to wait through the recording to get to this. So I'm going to kind of take a break as kind of the start of the official thing. So then I'll pretend that like I'm kicking off the real thing, getting started. All right. So hello, everyone. My name is Dan Rodney, and welcome to Noble Desktop's live stream for Intro to Adobe InDesign. Today, I'm going to be showing you how to get started using InDesign. I'm assuming that you have no prior experience with InDesign, although if you do have some, you might still learn some things. But today is going to be an introduction for getting people started with InDesign. And over the next 2 hours, I'm going to be showing you kind of the basic functionality of InDesign, as well as trying to give you an idea of the capabilities of InDesign. So we'll start with the fundamentals of creating a document, styling text, bringing in photos, and move up to creating multiple pages and styling text and that sort of stuff. So obviously we can't cover everything about InDesign in 2 hours. It'd be awesome if we could, but it's a little bit bigger than that. But today we'll get you started using InDesign as an introduction. If you know the other Adobe apps like Photoshop or Illustrator, there'll be some things that are familiar, but I'm not expecting that people have prior experience, and I'm going to be really starting from scratch, assuming that you don't know it. But we'll move at a quick pace, and you'll learn a bunch of cool stuff today. So just a couple things before I dive in and switch to my screen share and show you InDesign. If you're not familiar with Noble Desktop, for the past 27 years, we've been teaching all sorts of design and code related things. So we do teach a lot of Adobe apps. We're an Adobe authorized training center. I'm an Adobe certified expert in InDesign, Illustrator, Photoshop, InCopy. I think that's all. So we have in-person classes that you can attend in New York City, and you can also attend a lot of those online live as well. So you can screen share into the instructor's computer and hear them speaking through their microphone. So a lot of our classes you can attend in person or online. We also have wonderful workbooks, which are great for learning. They're on the screen next to me over that way. And you can check out our website for more on that. They're great learning step-by-step exercises walking you through using the programs. So if you can't make our classes and you want to go through a book, they're the next best thing for learning more. So today will give you a great start, and there's more options if you want to further your learning through our workbooks or through our classes. But I want to get you started, and enough talk about Noble Desktop and me, and let's get into InDesign. Before I get started, though, one thing I should mention, I'm going to be demonstrating with Adobe InDesign CC 2017. I think it was yesterday, they came out with 2017.1, which basically made the interface just aesthetically a little bit different. Everything's basically in the same places. It just aesthetically looks a little different than it did before. The buttons are flatter than they used to be, but even if it aesthetically looks different, everything's in the same place. The major difference was just that the new document dialog aesthetically looks different. They kind of redesigned that, but most of the options are still the same. We're not specifying, I'm not going to specifically focus on new features in 2017 or anything like that. In fact, the stuff that I'm showing, if you're not using 2017, if you're using an earlier version, pretty much everything's still going to work. So I'm going to focus on fundamental InDesign concepts. And even if your InDesign does look a little bit different than mine because you're using an older version, all the concepts should still apply. So keep that in mind. Don't be scared off that I might be using 2017 and you might be using an older version. That shouldn't be a big problem. All right, so let me switch to my screen share so you can see my screen there. And I'll go ahead and start InDesign here. So when you first launch InDesign, you get this welcome screen, this start screen as they call it. And from here, you can open up documents and create new documents. And we're going to create a new document. And I should mention that I'm assuming you probably already know what InDesign is, and that's why you're looking into learning it. But InDesign, Illustrator, and Photoshop, the relationship of them is that they all work together. InDesign is primarily used excuse me, for page layout. So InDesign is used for page layout, Photoshop is for photo retouching, and Illustrator is for drawing vector art. The primary differences between Photoshop and Illustrator is that Photoshop is for pixel-based graphics, Illustrator is for vector-based graphics, and InDesign is kind of the meeting place where the photos you create and retouch, and then the icons and things that you draw, everything comes into InDesign and can be laid out with multiple pages. And so text and graphics all come together in one place. And that's really what InDesign is good at. You can do single page documents through 1,000-page documents. You can do advertisements, business cards, magazines, books, posters, whatever kind of thing you want. So when you're creating a new document, this is the new file dialog. This has been redesigned in this just previous update that just came out yesterday. But the same options are still found in your older versions, even if your dialog looked different. Now, InDesign defaults to pikas. And some people know what pikas are, some people don't. For today, I'm going to be switching over to inches because it might be more familiar with more people. Of course, if you're in Europe, you'll be more familiar with millimeters. But basically, pikas are a typographic form of measurement, and inches, well, of course, inches or millimeters are not typographic specific. But if you've never heard of pikas, it's because it's more of a typography form of measurement. Definitely some people like them. I definitely like working in pikas. It is a personal preference as to whether you want to work in inches or pikas, but I'm not going to try to convince you one way or another. I am going to switch to inches just to make it a little bit more intuitive, because I think probably more people might be familiar with what inches are. Now, this is one thing that you can set in the new document dialog. If you're using an older version of InDesign, you won't have this here. So how would you change that? Well, let me create a document first, just so I can talk about this. Once you have a document open, you can change preferences for that particular file. So I have a document open. Let me change the preferences for that file. If you're on Windows, you would go to Edit, Preferences. On the Mac, you go to InDesign, Preferences. Once you're in the Preferences menu, then everything is the same. For example, we have units, as in units of measurement. And this is where you can change from your pikas to inches. You do have to do it for both the horizontal and vertical rulers. Honestly, I'm not sure why they separate those things out, because I don't think in inches vertically and pikas horizontally, I've never thought that should be separated, but maybe somebody does. So anyway, you can change this here. So if you're using an old version, that's where you change it. But you have to be careful about whether a document's open or not, because if a file is open, you're just changing the settings for that file. For example, one file could be in millimeters and another file could be in inches, because one is going to Europe and the other is staying in America. Because of that, when you change the document preferences, if you close it and you go to create another document, it's going to continue to go back to the application preferences. So right now, for example, it keeps wanting to go to pikas because that's my application's preference. However, if I want to change my application's preferences, the future default for all new files, with no files open, I can make a change to the preferences. So if I go to InDesign Preferences, or on Windows, Edit Preferences, then I can go down to Units. If I make the change here, this will change my application preferences, the default for all future files that I create on this computer. So now that I've changed that to inches, when I go ahead and create a new file, that's going to default to inches because my application defaults are set to inches. Now, if I get a file from someone else, that file has already been set as millimeters or inches, so that file's already going to know what measurements should be used for that file. But this document preference versus application preference, you can set it on your machine, so that on your machine, files that you create are going to default to your preferred measurements. Okay, so just be aware of, if no files are open, that's going to be the default settings for all new files. And if you have a file open, you're only changing that one file. So that's how you change it in previous versions of InDesign. Just make sure no documents are open, then set your preferences, and then you can create a new file. If you're using this newer version of InDesign, then you can actually change your preferences right here without having to go into that preferences. You can switch it for one document if you want. All right, so I'm going to do an advertisement, so I'm going to do an 8.5 by 11 document, but you can type in different sizes here. If you want it to be a wide page, you can choose the portrait. I want a tall page, landscape. If I want a tall page, I'll do portrait, which is what I want. I'm not going to do facing pages right now. Facing pages would be for a book or a magazine where you literally have two pages that face one another. You have a left and a right-hand page. In this case, I just have a single page. I know it's going to be put into a magazine, but it's just a single page advertisement, so I don't need multiple pages that are going to face each other. Also, it's primarily going to be a photograph with some heading, like with one heading and a logo and some text. So I don't need multiple columns for this. I probably do want some margins around the page. So if these areas are collapsed, like so, then we can expand them so we can get more options. So the margins are the space around the page. This will be giving me an empty space of about a ½ inch, well, not about, an exact ½ inch all the way around the page. Just, it's going to give me a guide. I can put stuff in that margin space if I want to, but it does give me a guide so I don't get too close to the edge. I don't necessarily need margins. If I want to, I can zero it out. And as long as this link is checked, it will zero them all. So let's see a document with 0 margins. Go ahead and create that. And, oh, did I have... I think I accidentally had 2 columns on there. Let me go back and recreate this. Yep. I accidentally hit my up arrow when I changed that. There we go. So let's put that back to 1 column. So 1 column here and 0 margins. Let's create that. So notice it's just the page. So there's no guides around the outside of my document. Let's create another new document. And this time I'll add some margins. I'll add a ½ inch margin all the way around the page. If you don't want them all to be the same, you can uncheck the link and then you can make them different, but I want them to be all the same. I'll create that document. So now we see we have an extra set of guides here, and that way I just don't get too close to the edge, and you can set the margins to be whatever you want, appropriate for your design. But you don't need them, you can zero them out. And in my case, mainly I have a photo going right up to the edge, so I really don't need margins in my particular design. Now, because I am going to have a photo go off the edge of the page, I actually need to set up one additional thing. So let me go back to the new dialog here and scroll down here to bleed and slug. The bleed, which is what I want to do here, is going to give us a little bit of extra space around the outside of the document. And this is for when we print on a piece of paper. Professionally speaking, when you send it actually to the magazine, you want to give them a little bit of extra photograph that goes off the edge, because when they trim the magazine, they might not be exactly cutting to your exact edge of your photograph. And what you don't want to happen is to get a little bit of a white sliver on the top or the bottom or the right-hand side or the left-hand side. And so you have to give them a little bit extra breathing room, a little bit of extra bleed, so that you can allow them to kind of wiggle and you don't know exactly where they're going to cut it off. So the standard bleed is 1/8 of an inch. And since I'm in inches, I could just type in 1/8 and it will convert that into decimals for me. So I don't have to know how to do that math. I just type in 1/8. If you're going to have a quarter, you could type in a quarter. Talk to your printer if you're not sure, but the default bleed in most cases should be 1/8 of an inch. And I'll click OK, click create there. And so now I have that bleed. When you bleed red. So the bleed guides are the red guides. Haha, yeah, they have a sense of humor at Adobe. But notice that I have these margin guides still on my page. So if you notice, every time I create a new document, there's kind of like a preset that it goes back to. It doesn't remember the last settings. So they kind of reset the settings so that it's kind of fresh, the same settings that you keep coming back to every single time. They do have some presets over here under print, under presets. So they do have some of these here, and there was a question in the chat about a US business card preset, and there is a preset for a business card. So if you want to create a business card, they know the default kind of normal amounts, and so you can create a business card like so. And so if you want to start with a preset, just switch over to your presets area under print. If you don't see it right there, click view all, and you can get a couple different presets here. So for example, I was using the letter preset, so it always defaults to the same letter standard options. So I'm going to do no facing pages. The 1 column is fine. 0 margins all the way around. A standard 1/8 of an inch bleed all the way around, and that looks like it should be good. So I'll create that document. Very good. So we just had the page. We have no margins, just the bleed guides out here. So now we can start to add content. Now InDesign has this fundamental concept of boxes or frames, they call it. They have picture frames and text frames, and if I call it a frame or if I call it a box, it's the same thing. But you have to put something content-wise, you have to put that into a box. So you have to put it into a text box. You have to put it into a photo box. And so the type tool, for example, if I come over here to the type tool, I can drag out a box and then I can put type into it. So I can put some text. I can't just click on the screen to type. Clicking doesn't work because clicking doesn't create a box. I know in some applications it might, but not in InDesign. I always have to drag out a box and then I can put the type into that box. So over here on the left we have our toolbar. Now when I select something with the selection tool, which is the top tool right here, as I select an object up top in the top bar across here, there are different options. We call this the control panel up here at the top. I know it's not labeled or anything, but that is the control panel because you see various controls for what you have selected. It is contextual. As you change your selection to different things, you will see different options. For example, if I use my type tool and I have my type selected, now I'm seeing various type options that I can choose from. So if I select the box with the selection tool, now I'm seeing box options. Where is it on the page? How big is it? The width and the height? I can rotate it, those types of things. And with the selection of the type, I can change my font and my size and type options. So the selection tool selects the box, and the type tool selects stuff in the box, as well as creates type boxes as well. So notice the cursor when I'm doing this. When I'm in a box, I'll select text. When I'm outside the box, I'll create one. So notice the cursor is either an I-beam or it's a pointer with a box around it. When you see that box around it, that tells you that it's going to create a box. So I can drag out a new box when I see that cursor. But when I only see the I-beam, that tells me that it's an editing cursor at that time. So I'm going to be editing text rather than creating boxes. Okay. Now you can use a kind of general box tool and convert it into a text box or a picture box. But the nice thing about the type tool is you just drag it out and you've got a place to put some type. Now, let me go back to my selection tool. With the selection tool selected, I can click on a box and I can hit delete. If you do that, of course, it's deleting all the text inside, so you're losing that text. If, however, I go to my type tool and I highlight all the text inside the box and I delete it, I still have the box there. I can still use my selection tool. I can move that box around. I have a place to put text even if there is no text in it. So if you're really done with that box and you don't want it to be there, don't just delete the type out of the box, actually delete the box itself using the selection tool. But it's useful to be able to have text boxes there. For example, if you're making a template, you might want to have the text boxes in the right place, and you might want to have them empty just so people can come in and fill in the appropriate content within a template. Okay. As an easy way to switch back and forth between the selection tool and the type tool, because that's something we very commonly do, we can double click using the selection tool and it automatically goes into the text box and selects the text, if you drag across it. So let's go back to the selection tool. You just double click and you're in the type tool. Now you can select text. So let me zoom in here just a little bit. I'm going to select something and zoom in. So up here under view, we'll do zoom in. Notice that the keyboard shortcut for that, I know they say equals, but that's the plus key. So command plus and minus, and on Windows, control plus and minus. Those are standard Adobe keystrokes for zooming in and out. So command plus and minus, on Windows, control plus and minus. And notice that based on what I have selected, it's zooming in on that selection. So it doesn't matter what you have selected, whether it's a box. Let's say I select this box here, command plus and minus zoom towards that box. So that's a really useful thing to select something and then zoom towards it using command plus and command minus. All right. So when you're in your selection tool, you can double click and boom, you're in the text box and you can be editing text. Now the only thing is, how do you get back? Well, if you hit the escape key, then you can escape that text box and you get back to your selection tool. So kind of a nice quick way to work with these boxes. You can use your type tool to drag out a box, type out some text into it. If you want some placeholder text, we can actually get that through the type menu, fill with placeholder text. I'll show you how to bring in some official text that a client might give you in a moment. You can manipulate the text, style it, and then if you want to select the box, you can hit the escape key and you're back in your selection tool. So now you can be moving that box around and you can be resizing it to adjust your layout. Now, when I'm resizing this, oops, accidentally did something there. I'll just undo that. If you resize this, notice that you just get an outline when you resize if you're quick. So if I just quickly drag, I get an outline. Now, if I'm patient for a moment, if I click and hold for just a moment, and then I drag, now notice that I get a live preview as I resize the box. So that's just a matter of patience. If you click and drag quickly, you don't get a preview. If you click and hold for just a moment before you drag, and it's just a fraction of a second, or maybe a second, it's not really long at all, just click and hold for a second, then you get that live preview. Same thing with moving. If you just click and drag, you just get an outline. But if you click and hold for just a moment before dragging, maybe it's like a second, then you will get that live preview. So that's nice. That live preview is very nice, especially when reflowing text. Just click and hold for a moment before you do that. Now, if you ever do make a mistake, InDesign has unlimited undos. You can keep going back to undo, 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 which is Command Z on the Mac or Control Z on Windows. If you go back too far and you've undone too many things, you can redo. So undo goes back in your history and redo goes forward in your history. And that is unlimited. You don't have a panel to see all your things that you've done like you have in Photoshop, but neither Illustrator or InDesign have a history panel. That's unique to Photoshop. And if you think about it, Photoshop is the only one that has limited undos, and it's the one that has the panel. InDesign and Illustrator have unlimited undos, and they don't have a panel to view that, probably because it's unlimited amounts of stuff that could be put into that history panel. So that's good news that InDesign has unlimited undo. So if you make a mistake, that's okay. You can just go back and undo it. It's not a problem. All right, a couple other things about moving around within your document. There's a hand tool over here that you can use, just like there is a zoom tool. So for example, if you use a zoom tool, you can also just click on something to zoom in. Notice that it's always showing the plus icon, so it's always by default a zoom in tool. If you want it to become a zoom out tool, you have to hold Option on the Mac or Alt on Windows, and now it's a zoom out tool. You can click to zoom in, or the other thing is that you can drag from left to right to zoom in as well, and this will give you an animated zoom depending on your computer. If you have a recent computer with a proper video card installed that Adobe supports, you'll get this animated zoom. If you're on an older machine, then you might not get this animated zoom. You might just get a box that you drag around an element, and when you release, it'll zoom in. But if you have a newer computer with the proper video card, you'll get this animated zoom by dragging left and right. But a lot of times I do really like that keystroke for zooming in or out on a selection. That's very, very useful. But when I am zoomed in and I want to move around, the hand tool is great for moving around. The hand tool is much more useful than using your scroll bars to go up and down, because the scroll bars you have to go in only one direction. And when you use the hand tools, you can drag in any direction. Now the hand tool is a tool that I technically use all day long, but I never actually choose the hand tool, because I'm normally in another tool and I don't really want to go to the hand tool to choose it. So like all Adobe apps, if you want to access the hand tool, you can hold the Option key and drag around on your screen, depending on your tool that you're in. So this was an interesting thing. Years ago, if you had ever used Quark Express, they had always used Option as a way to drag around using the hand tool. But Adobe had specified in their other apps, they'd always use the spacebar. The only thing is the spacebar, that's great if you're not doing text. Like in Photoshop, when you're primarily retouching photos, the spacebar is fine. If you're drawing things in Illustrator, probably the spacebar is fine there as well. But in InDesign, when you're so text heavy, well, guess what the spacebar is going to do when you're in text? The spacebar is going to type in spaces. So the spacebar wasn't so great with InDesign because you're going to accidentally type in spaces. So in the very early versions of InDesign, they said, well, you can use space when you're not in text. And when you are in text, you could use Option. But then people would get confused because sometimes they'd hold space and then, oh, I was in text. I didn't want to do that. And the other thing is, if you were using the selection tool and you Option dragged, that would make a copy of something, because that's actually a very useful thing to Option drag to make a copy. So it was confusing having two keystrokes, regardless of whether you were in or outside of text. So then Adobe said, hey, we have an idea. Let's put them together. Option spacebar or Alt spacebar on Windows, Alt spacebar or Option spacebar always works. It doesn't matter whether you're in text or not, because it will always work. And you roll onto it Option or Alt and then spacebar, because you don't want to hold the spacebar first before you hold Option or Alt, because you're going to get some spaces until you hold down that other key. So kind of roll onto it, hold the Option or Alt and then spacebar, and it doesn't have to be that you hold the one down for long, just kind of roll onto it, Option or Alt first and then spacebar. And then you can drag around on your screen. So while that's a little different than all the other Adobe apps, because the other Adobe apps concentrate on using spacebar for your hand tool, it makes sense to do that in InDesign. Okay, so other viewing options here. So we can zoom in and out using our keystrokes. That's very, very useful. But a lot of times we need to zoom out and see the entire page. So we can go up to View, and we can do Fit Page or Fit Spread if you have a two-page spread of a left and a right-hand page. I only have a single one, so it really doesn't matter which one I have, which one I use here. But that Command 0 is Fit Page in Window. Control 0 on Windows. And that just shows you the whole page. So I'm going to do that keystroke a lot as I work. I'll zoom in on something. I might pan around within the document, and then I might go back and fit the page in the window when I'm all done. One other zoom level that's important as well is actual size, 100%. So if you do this one, which is Command 1 or Control 1, that goes to the proper correct size. And you want to make sure that it is the actual size. Like here, I'm actually holding up a piece of paper to my screen, and it is the actual size of my piece of paper. I know you can't see that, but you'll just have to trust me. Of course, on your screen, it might not be, because you might not have it, it's not necessarily properly set up, but on my screen, that is the correct size. In old versions of InDesign, that was not trustworthy. It went to 100%, but 100% wasn't actually always the actual printing size. And I forget which version of InDesign finally fixed that, so it was officially correct. So you do just want to verify. Like, the easiest way is to make an 8.5 by 11 and actually just hold up a sheet of paper on top, and your document width should match the width of your piece of paper, and it should match. And if it doesn't, you're using an older version of InDesign where that isn't quite trustworthy. You might have to figure out a different zoom level, like 130% or something, for that to work. But if you have a recent version of InDesign, that should work, and that should be trustworthy. And that's useful for guessing. Instead of guessing, well, what size will this be when it prints, you can actually see what size it will print. It takes the guesswork out of the sizing. And then you don't have to waste a print just to see, is this an appropriate size for my design? All right, so let's go back out and say Fit Page in Window and delete that stuff. All right, so we've got some text there, but what about graphics? So I'm going to come down here and choose the rectangle frame tool. Now there's a rectangle tool and a rectangle frame tool. We'll come back to the difference between those in a moment, but I just want a rectangle frame to create. And I just want to have some content come in here. Now, in this rectangle frame, notice it's just a frame. You can have anything in there that you want. So let's import some content. Now, InDesign calls that place. We can place content into our documents. Other apps often call it import. They just call it place. And in here, I'm going to go in, and I've got some files here that I can import. I can import text into that, or I can import photos or graphics into that. I'll start by importing a photograph. And actually, let me import this picture right here. All right, now, I just made a randomly sized box. I didn't know how big my photo was going to be. I just made a randomly sized box. So most likely, my photo and my box are not the same aspect ratio. So I'm probably cropping part of the photograph. I can go to my selection tool, and I can resize the picture box here, and I can reveal the rest of the photograph, and I can see that Okay, this is where the photograph ends. Let me zoom in a bit more so that you guys can see this better. Again, when you're resizing, if you just resize quickly, you just get the outline. You don't get a preview. If you click and hold, then you'll get a preview. And this preview is really, really handy. When you click and hold, notice all the rest over part that's cropped off. So that's really nice to be able to see as you're adjusting this, what parts of the photo are cropped off. So that's worth waiting for. Now, instead of having to try to fit this box to my photograph, the better question would be, why did I create a box ahead of time if I didn't know how big the photograph was going to be? So you don't have to make a box ahead of time. I can just, with nothing selected, go to File, Place, choose the photo that I want to import, and it puts it into my cursor telling me, hey, where do you want to put it on the page? And you just click, and it brings it in at the size that it was made. So let's do that again. We just do File, Place, choose another photograph, and I can click to place that one on the page. If I don't want to bring it in at the size I created it, I can undo that. Puts it back in my cursor and gives me a second shot for importing that. I can drag out whatever size I want. And as I'm dragging that, if you look at the cursor, you'll see the percentage of scale from the original size. Like here I'm 10%, 11% of the original size. Here I'm at 71% of the original size. That's important because when you're dealing with photographic, pixel-based graphics like this, you don't want to go bigger than 100%. It's okay to go smaller, but you don't want to go bigger. And we'll talk about resolution in just a little bit here. Okay, so in this particular case, I want one main photograph. So I'm going to bring that in. I'm going to do a File, Place. We're going to create an ad for Australia. And I'm going to place this in. I want to put it at the edge of my bleed. So I'm going to go up here to the edge of my bleed and click. There we go. Now, it came in at the size that I created it. Now, I knew how big my ad was going to be. I knew it was going to be 8.5 by 11 plus a bleed. So I created this image at that size. And I created it at 300 pixels per inch. So let's say we go to Photoshop for a moment and open up that photograph. If I go into my image size, we can take a look and see that that is 8.75, which is 8.5 plus 1/8 of an inch on the left and 1/8 of an inch on the right. And this is, again, 11 inches because it's 8.5 by 11 plus 1/8 of an inch on the top and 1/8 of an inch on the bottom. And it's 300 pixels per inch. When you're dealing with professional print quality, you're going to send it to a magazine or get it printed in a book, something like that. 300 pixels per inch is the ideal goal. Now, technically speaking, you can go a little bit less. And if you're printing it in-house, like on an inkjet or something, again, sometimes you can go less. But the closer you get to 300, the better the quality is going to be. You know, you could probably drop down to 250 and not really notice much of a loss of quality. Once you start getting into things like 150, you know, which is half the resolution of this, you're going to start to notice that it's noticeably softer, and you're eventually going to start seeing pixels. You know, if you have something very low res, like 72 pixels per inch, and that's a common web resolution, by the way, 72 pixels per inch. The pixels are so big, you're going to notice them when you print. So you want to be very careful about resolution and have enough resolution in your documents. And what happens is, as long as your document is 300 pixels per inch when you bring it in, it's okay to go smaller with that because you would just be increasing resolution. But if you went bigger with that, you would be decreasing your resolution. So you want to be careful of that. It's okay to go a little bit less than 300, but not dramatically less than 300. And you don't really need anything higher than 300 because beyond that, most printers just can't show much more detail than 300 pixels per inch. They just are incapable of, even though they're, you know, because of things like line screen and stuff, there's a limit to how much resolution they can actually show. When you have this in InDesign and you placed it here, if you want to resize it, if you want to scale it, the easiest way to do that is, I should say the kind of the best way I think for design is to visually resize it. You can come up here and choose an amount to scale, but it's not interactive in the sense that you can just drag it. And so I think a lot of times people want to not just type in a number, but to see how big or small it is. it's useful to know that you can make it 50% smaller than the current size, but what if you want to just make it the right size visually to fit into the page? Command-Shift-Drag is a really good keyboard shortcut to know. On Windows, it would be Control-Shift-Drag. So Command-Shift-Drag on Mac, Control-Shift-Drag on Windows. And that's an interactive scale, and that is for scaling anything that you have selected. That could be type, it could be graphics, it does not matter what it is, and you just grab the corner that you want to scale from and hold Command-Shift, or on Windows, Control-Shift. And that will let you scale. So if you're curious, well, what's the final quality going to be like now? I've made the image smaller. You can check out the info panel, and this is very useful for you to see. Actually, in the file, it's 300 pixels per inch. But effectively, what is going to output as for print is going to be 441 because we've shrunk it, so we've increased the resolution. Now, if we make it bigger, if I Command-Shift-Drag and make it bigger, and I keep making it bigger, notice now, even though it came in at 300 pixels per inch, the file is actually 300 pixels per inch, it effectively is going to output at 228. So I really don't care at all what actual pixels per inch is. I do care about effective pixels per inch because effective pixels per inch is your output resolution. And your output resolution is what matters. And so 228 is starting to get a little low. I'd really like to have something higher quality. I want to try to get as close to 300 as possible. 263 would probably be fine. But the reason I bring this up is because if you bring in a very large digital photograph, sometimes they come in actually at 72 pixels per inch, but they're giant. They're like 20 inches in the document. And you have to really shrink it down to get it to fit onto the page. But by the time you do, even though the actual pixels per inch was 72, once you shrink it down, it might effectively end up outputting at 300 pixels or even higher. So all that really matters is how it goes out, how it outputs, and that's effective pixels per inch. So that's what you want to keep your eye on, the effective pixels per inch. And that's in the info panel, which can be found under Window, Info. Now, there was a question in the chat and also a question that I wanted to address for everybody about file formats. So in this case, I am importing a TIFF file. And notice that most of my things are TIFF files in this case. But that's not necessarily the only format that you can import. So if I open this up in Photoshop, Photoshop files are also perfectly fine as well. So you can save as a Photoshop document. Nothing wrong with that. So that's a PSD. That's perfectly fine as well. In the case that I saved my TIFF file, let me save as, and I'll choose my TIFF file. When you're saving a TIFF, I'm going to replace the old one that I had. If you don't have any compression, your file size is going to be potentially large, right? And let's start with that, and then I'll talk about compression in a moment. This byte order doesn't matter. I know I'm on a Mac, so I will just choose a Mac, but it really doesn't matter because PCs can understand the Macs, and the Macs can understand the PCs. This is really irrelevant. It doesn't really matter at all. You can still have a cross-platform file that goes back and forth between Mac and PC, regardless of what is checked here. But I normally check Mac because I'm on a Mac. And so no compression, saved as a Mac here. Let's save that. Now let's go back and save one more version of this, and I'm going to say dash compressed. And this time I'm going to check on LZW compression. Now LZW compression is it's not harmful. Some compressions, like JPEG, for example, would be harmful. They would lose image quality. LZW is completely harmless. It doesn't hurt the image at all. It doesn't degrade the image quality. You don't lose quality. You just lose file size. Now you might say, well, why wouldn't I always want to do this? Because not all printers not all printers can handle LZW compressed TIFFs. Sometimes the RIP software that they use for the printers might not be able to decompress this compressed graphic, and they might have an issue with it. So if you're not sure, you can never go wrong with the uncompressed TIFFs. That's never going to be a problem. If you're dealing with a printer and it's fine to use LZW compression, you can certainly save a lot of file size by going with LZW compression. But it's possible it will reduce your compatibility with certain printers. If you're not sure, you can always ask the printer. But when in doubt, go with no compression. But I did want to mention that more and more printers are capable with LZW compressed TIFFs, so you can definitely save a lot of file size and you don't lose image quality. And let's just compare the different file sizes from here. Notice that the compressed TIFF is only 10 megs. That's really small. The Photoshop is 20, and the uncompressed one is 36. So I would say if you're not going to compress your TIFFs, probably Photoshop is not only easier to go with, but it's also probably going to be smaller. If you're going to compress your TIFFs, like all of my TIFFs here have been compressed, then the compressed TIFF is typically the smallest file size you're going to get. The cool thing is that Photoshop and TIFF both support transparency. They both support layers. They're good in that sense. So they're very, very similar to each other. Photoshop does support spot colors where TIFF doesn't if you're doing spot colors. So I would say when in doubt, if you're not sure, just go with Photoshop because you really can't go wrong with Photoshop. And you've got a pretty good file size in most cases. But if you know you can go with a compressed TIFF, that would be the smallest file size that you could get away with. So any of those are perfectly good file formats that you can go with. You can technically bring in JPEGs into InDesign. So if you download something from a stock photo agency and it's already a JPEG, you can bring that into InDesign. The only thing is that if you were going to edit that JPEG, if you resave a JPEG and resave a JPEG, every time you save, it recompresses and squeezes a little bit more life out of that image. So it's generally not a good practice to edit JPEGs. If all you're doing is putting it into your document and printing it, in that case, it would be fine. But if you're ever going to edit that, make sure that you save that as a Photoshop document or a TIFF before you bring it into InDesign. So InDesign can bring in lots of stuff, but as far as edited graphics, really TIFF and Photoshop are the ideal. Okay, for pixel-based graphics coming from Photoshop. Okay, so then what about vector graphics? Okay, so let's bring in a vector graphic. So I'm going to place in, and actually I want to place in a bunch of things. I want to let's place in the Photoshop document. Let's also place in my color logo as well. And let's also place in some text. You can command click or on Windows control click to select things that aren't touching in your list. If you want to bring in a bunch of things that are touching, you can shift click and you get all the in-betweens. So you click on one, shift click another, and you get all the in-betweens. I don't want to get all the in-between files, so I'm going to hold Command on my Mac or Control on Windows, and I want the text, my logo, and the uncompressed, or the compressed, no, I want to do the Photoshop. So Photoshop, a logo, and a text file. Now InDesign says, I don't know where you want to put all those things, so in my cursor, it says that there are 3 things in my cursor, and I can use my arrow keys to choose which one of those I want to bring in first. So it doesn't matter what arrow you hit, up, down, left, right, just hit an arrow key. And I want to place my photo down first, so I'm going to click for that. Then I can place my text. Yeah, I could do that. I could place my text there by dragging out a box. And then I can click here to bring in my logo. So cool, I just brought in all that stuff really quickly by just selecting it all and popping it in. Very good. Now, notice when I dragged out that box that there is now a red plus at the bottom right corner, not the very corner, but kind of the bottom right here. And that plus means overset text. I can't fit all the text that I placed into my document into this box. So I can make the box bigger, and now everything's fine. In fact, I get a warning down here at the bottom of my document saying 1 error. You're like, ooh, 1 error. So that 1 error is actually the overset text in that case. As soon as I make the box bigger, it rechecks the document and says, oh, now there are no errors. Now, while I'm pointing this out, that there's this checking going on down here, literally everything you do in InDesign, as soon as you do it, this thing called live preflight is checking your document at every moment that you do something. Every time you hit an arrow key to nudge an element, it is checking your document again to make sure that you don't have any errors. It's a nice concept, except I noticed that it slows InDesign down sometimes pretty tremendously, especially on bigger documents. I remember when I was working in InDesign before this feature was released, and then after it was released, and I noticed that InDesign was noticeably slower. So personally, I like to turn off this live preflight, and I find that it speeds up InDesign. You can always turn it back on if you want at some point, but I don't need continuous preflighting. Preflighting is trying to catch errors. These errors will be notified at other points in time, like if you open a file up and you're missing a font, you'll be notified. If you go to print and you're missing a font, you'll be notified. Also, if you have overset text when you go to print or make a PDF, you'll be notified. So you're going to be notified in other cases. You don't need it to happen all the time. So I like to go in here and uncheck Enable Preflight for all documents. And that just turns the preflight off. You can always come back in and turn it on for this one document if you want, when you want it. But normally, as a default, if you uncheck Enable Preflight for all documents, from now on, it will never have preflight on, and you can open up as many files as you want. It's always going to be off, and for me, I find that that speeds up InDesign, and I think you'll have a better experience with that turned off. Like I said, it's still going to warn you at other times when you open files or print files, so I don't find that the live aspect of that really adds much value, unless you're creating like custom special preflight profiles. But again, I kind of want to run them at the end, not all the time as I'm designing. So I don't feel like I need the live aspect of that. I'd rather have a faster InDesign than the live preflighting. Okay, so I'm going to select this logo right here, and I'm going to hit Command plus to zoom in, or Control plus on Windows to zoom in on this. Okay, now that actually looks quite good, and it's interesting. Oh, I guess InDesign in this latest update must have changed their defaults. Interesting. Okay, so I want to talk about display performance. So by default, I'm guessing that InDesign finally changed their default display performance. In previous versions, InDesign would In previous versions, InDesign would display as a typical display by default. So if you're using an older version, you might have that as your default. So this is just a display quality issue. When you go with a typical display, that is a low quality but fast display. Now that's on vector art as well as pixel-based art as well. Doesn't matter what kind of art, this is all the art in the document. If you're in a high quality display, it just looks better, but it's going to be a little bit slower. So when you're working, if you want to work faster, you can keep it as typical display. It's not going to look as nice. It'll still print fine, it'll still PDF fine, but it might not look as nice on screen. When you want the better quality and you don't mind it being a little slower, you can go to high quality. Now, I'm not saying it's slow. It all depends on how fast your computer is and how many graphics you have. It's really the graphics that might slow things down. And so if you find that even if it defaults to high quality, if you want it to be a bit faster, if you find that it's a little slow, you can bump down to typical display. Never bother going with the fast display unless you don't even care to see photographs. And actually, I wanted to point that out because sometimes people accidentally hit the keyboard shortcut for fast display and they freak out. They're like, where did all my pictures go? Don't worry. You just have to go back and change the display quality. You didn't lose your photographs, but people really freak out if they accidentally hit that keystroke and they're like, where did it go? I just killed my document. Oh my. It's a horrible thing if it happens accidentally and you don't know what just happened. So I'm going to bounce back over to high quality display. That's purely on-screen display. It does not affect output whatsoever. It's just how fast does your computer work and how nice is the on-screen display, and that's it. That's all that affects it. While I'm mentioning that, let's say I go back into the typical display. Depending on the zoom level, your type that's small on screen might not look like type. It might just be like little gray blocks. And that's, for me, it's a holdover to old computers when they were slow. I want it to even look like tiny little text even though I can't read it. I don't want it to just gray out like as though it's bars. I want to know, is it text or is it an actual gray bar? So you can change that preference under InDesign Preferences or on Windows under Edit Preferences. It's a display performance thing as well. I'm actually surprised that they didn't change this. Yeah, so this is your default display, right? So this is now defaultly set to high quality, and this is what they must have changed this in the 2017.1 update because it used to default to typical display. So now they're defaulting to high quality. If for some reason you find that it's high quality is too slow and you don't want it to default to that, you can set your default here. That's what it will always default to. I'm going to leave it as that high quality. Now, these are the settings for those different views. In high quality, notice that Greeking of type, that's the graying out of type, so it doesn't look like type, it looks like a gray bar. We can set that to 0, which effectively gets rid of Greeking. But I might also use typical display, and that has a different setting. Notice they're also greeking it there as well. So you want to change it for both typical display as well as high quality, because you might be using both of those display settings. That is an application preference, so once you set that, you don't have to worry about setting it again. It is going to apply to all documents. So I'm going to click OK, and now even though I can't read it, it still looks like text. It doesn't look like those gray bars. Okay. Now, as I work and I do things, InDesign is generally a very stable program, but it's possible that maybe your power goes out or maybe InDesign crashes or something. And what would happen? I've been working for a while now on this document. I certainly wouldn't want to lose my work. But what if the power went out and InDesign crashed? I don't know what I can do to make InDesign crash, but I am going to force quit InDesign just for the sake of demonstration purposes. Now you might say, oh no, he just lost his work, right? No, just relaunch InDesign. You never lose more than 1 minute's worth of work because every 60 seconds it does a little backup. You don't notice it. It's not an auto save, it's just an auto backup. And look at that. My document's been recovered. This is a file that's never been saved ever. And it also works, of course, with saved documents as well. That when you reopen it, all your files that were open will automatically be reopened within a minute's worth of work from when you crashed. It's possible that maybe it backed up like 30 seconds ago, so maybe you've lost the last 30 seconds worth of work. So just double check the last few things that you were doing, and you might have to redo a couple things right before the crash. But you never lose more than 60 seconds worth of work. It is amazing. It's beautiful. What I really like about it actually is that it's not an auto save, because I want to save files when I want to save them. And maybe I was experimenting with something right before it crashed, and I didn't want it to automatically save that because maybe I wasn't going to save it. Maybe it was just an experiment with something. But if I want to, now I get to choose, am I going to save this, or am I just going to close it and not save the changes? So InDesign has your back in case of a crash or a power outage. And as soon as you can get your computer back up and running and you relaunch InDesign, just relaunch it and wait for your files to reopen. If you had 5 files open, all 5 will be reopened. And then you just have to decide, are you going to go through and save the work that was recovered? It's awesome. It's an amazing feature. Has definitely saved me on multiple occasions, and it's great. That was in there from the very first version of InDesign, and I definitely appreciate it. All right, so now the next thing is we want to start to actually lay out some of this stuff here and make it look a little bit better. Like this color logo actually that I have here, that's not very good in my layout. Kind of be better to have a white version of that. So when we're placing graphics into InDesign, these graphics end up being linked to the originals. So I have to maintain those files that I originally placed into InDesign. I can't just toss them out. Like, let's say once you placed it into InDesign, some programs will embed the graphics into that app. And you might think, well, I put it into InDesign, I can toss out the original file because I have it in InDesign. No. What you see in InDesign is merely a preview. And it is actually only storing the typical display preview. High quality needs the file to actually work to get the full quality display. The only thing is this typical display, that quality is what's saved into the InDesign file. It's just a preview. It's not the actual thing. If you toss this out, then you will not be able to print a high quality print. You will not be able to create a high quality PDF of your layout. You need to keep these originals. So I like to create a folder and put the InDesign file as well as all the artwork into that same folder, and that way stuff doesn't get lost. Also, if you rename it, you could lose the link because it's actually linked to it by its location and its file name. So let's talk about links. Over here, there's a links panel that I can click to open it up. If you don't see that panel, you can find it under Window, Links. In here, you can see the file, and I can mouse over it, and I can see where that is stored on my computer. If I want to make any sort of edit, I can just select that file and click the Edit button, and that's going to launch Photoshop or Illustrator or whatever program created it, and in there I can do some editing. For example, maybe I want to do a curves adjustment on this and make it brighter. I'm going to make it, well, actually, let's make it darker here. I'm going to make it really dark. It's not actually how I really want to make it look, but I want you to see that once I get back to InDesign, you want to make sure that it updates. So I'm going to make sure that I save this, Okay. Now, when I come back to InDesign, watch what happens. Oh, look, it's automatically updated with the latest version. When you click edit, they know that you're going to make an edit, and when you come back, they're going to update the preview automatically. You do have to save the file for it to do that, but you just hit edit, you make the change, you save the file. When you come back to InDesign, it automatically updates the preview. Same thing happens with Illustrator. If you select the logo and you click edit, this time you're going to go to Illustrator to make that change though. So let's say I select this and I make it transparent. Again, we save. When you go back to InDesign, it automatically updates. Now you see the transparent version. Let's go back to the high quality display. I'll make a copy of that just so you can see. See, it's a transparent kangaroo now. All right, so that's how you make edits to your art. Now let me hit edit and go back because I actually don't want that to be transparent. So I'll do that. I'll save. I'll come back. It updates. Now let's say it's a little bit of a different situation. Maybe I've saved my document that I'm working on in InDesign. Let's go ahead and save as. I'm going to call this my new Aussie ad. And maybe InDesign wasn't open. Maybe you didn't have your document open when you were making those changes. Maybe somebody else has since retouched those graphics. So let me open up that Photoshop document, make it dark again. And so that change was made since the last time it was placed in InDesign. So when you open up that InDesign layout, InDesign checks through the document and says, hey, there's been one link that's modified. Do you want to update it? Yes or no? If you just hit update, automatically pulls in the latest version, and you're going to see that that's now the darker version. You might think, well, why wouldn't I want to do that? Well, what if somebody cropped the photo differently and you want to see what's actually happening? So let me close this. I'm not going to save changes. It's possible you might want to say, don't update them so that you can actually see the file when you're updating it. In this case now, we see an exclamation mark next to this. If I was in a different location in the file, maybe I was in a different page or something, I was in a different place, we can select this and then use the go to link, and it would actually take me to where that link is. So you can navigate a large document and have it take you right to where that is, and it highlights it. If you then want to update it, you could just double click on this icon to update it, and then you can see what the change is. And that's very useful when somebody else does something and you might not know, is it going to affect my layout? Might I need to change something? I want to see it happening instead of just updating them all and hoping that everything is okay. Okay. Let me hit edit one more time to go back, and I'm going to take this off. Just going to trash that curves adjustment and do one more save, and then come back. And again, InDesign automatically updates. Now, let me save that file and close it. What if you were to rename something? So let's say I rename this and I have like a version 2, but I don't have my original file anymore. It's not going to know that that file name changed. So when I open up that file, it says, hey, this document contains a link that's missing. You can use the links panel to relink it. Okay. So now we get the missing icon. It does not know where that is. So you can, again, double click on it. And it wants to know, hey, where is this file? So you can go choose the new name. And now you're relinked to the new name, and everything is fine once again. So it's okay to do that, but you want to make sure that you tell InDesign what the new name is. The same thing would happen if you move it. It may not know where you moved that file. So for example, let's save that. If you had that name, but let's say you moved it. Actually, let's keep the dash version 2. So it's still the same name, but it just moved. Oh, now you're like, desktop. Hey, it found it. Sometimes InDesign will do this kind of amazing thing where it's like, I already looked at these folders and I kind of know that you moved it there because I've been kind of looking around at these folders. It doesn't always work. It kind of had to have been seeing that thing in that other folder. Like for example, if I put this into a subfolder, if I make a new folder called test and I put it in there, it's not going to find there because I've never pointed InDesign at the test folder. So it's like, I don't know where that is. It's gone missing. You'd have to double click on it and tell me where it went. So it's possible it might relink in a very select few cases. But for the most part, if you rename it or you move it, it's going to lose the link and you have to point it to where you moved the file or what the new name is. So in general, try not to rename your files unless you really have to. And once you place them in, it just makes life easier if you just keep the same name. Okay. So once again, I'm going to rename, because I renamed it, I'm going to relink by double clicking and point it to the new name. And then we're all linked up. So you want to make sure that you're all linked up so that you can output this and it can access those files, because to create a print or a PDF, it has to actually read these files to pull the full quality out of that. Okay, so we're actually about halfway through, believe it or not. Time's flying. When we come back, we're gonna take a 5-minute restroom break, or you can go grab a drink, stretch. When we come back, we're gonna do type styling. We're gonna create a print. We're gonna create a PDF and do some other features in InDesign. So I'm gonna pull up a timer just so we don't lose track of time. And in 5 minutes, we'll continue. so let's get back to it. Bring the chat back up and minimize that. All right, so breaks over, and we're back to InDesign. Let's do some type styling here. We've got this text in the box, and I want to start to color it and style it with type. So change the font, change the size, and do some type styling. So I want to select this text here, and I want to make it white. And for that, we have color swatches over here. So we click on color swatches, and there's some pre-made color swatches, and of course you can create your own in here as well. But I want to apply the paper color swatch because paper is white, so I want it to be white, and I'm going to click on paper. So now the color of that is white. Now, when you're doing this, you have to be careful. Excuse me. You have to be careful of what is selected. For example, if I have the box selected using the selection tool, there are two things that I can apply color to. And this icon here is very, very small, but this first one here is fill, and the other one is stroke. So whichever one is on top, that's the one you're going to be applying color to. Right now, the red slash means none. There is no fill, and there is no stroke. If I click on fill, I could put yellow in that box, or red, or green. Then I can click on the stroke, and I could choose a stroke color. And for example, I could put a red stroke, which is a red outline. Let me come up here and make the outline thicker so that you can see that there's that red stroke, or blue stroke, or pink stroke, magenta stroke. You can do whatever you want. Or you can say no stroke, fill, none. If you're dealing with the type, either by choosing the type button here, so this is the content, versus the container, which is the box. If I go to the type right now is paper color, which is white. I can make it black, I can make it blue, magenta, whatever color I want. I want to choose white. Maybe you want to do black with a white outline. You can choose stroke and choose a white outline. Of course, with type, you'd have to do a thinner outline for something this small. So maybe like 0.1 or something like that. If I zoom in closely, you can outline type. So you have to be careful what's selected. Most of the time, people accidentally stroke type when they really mean to fill type. And that's what I wanted to show here, was that when you first come in, even if you have selected the type using the type tool, you can't just click on the button and assume that it's going to work because it might be set to stroke. So you have to be very careful of that. Whichever one is in front, that's the one that's going to get the color. So you have to make sure that you're on fill, so you're filling it with the color that you want. Okay. So let's zoom back out, use my selection tool, and I really want to move this paragraph of text here somewhere else from the heading. So I want to take this text and cut it out of this box. And then I'm going to drag out a new box and paste it into that box. And that way I can move it somewhere else. I can move that over here. And this heading area I'm going to make bigger so that it can have text anywhere in this space. I'm going to double click to go into the box and highlight the text. And I will go up here and choose a different font. So you can click on the font menu, scroll through your fonts, and choose a different one, like so. If you know the name of the font, you can come here and just type in the name of the font. Like if you want Catholic Script Pro, you just start typing Catholic and then choose it when it appears. And then you can choose a bigger type size. I want this to be about that size. Maybe I want this to be a lot bigger. So I can use the menu to access some quick sizes, but then dial in the specific size that I want. And then I can also set the leading. So right down here is your leading amount. Now you have to be very careful about leading in InDesign. And this is one that's, I don't like the default setting of InDesign and how they deal with leading. And so because it can create some issues. The default works like leading used to be when they had strips of lead in between lines of type. In the sense that one line could have more space between it, and then the next line could have a different amount of space, and the next line could have a different amount of space. Every line could have different amounts of space between them. That's how traditional typesetting was before computers. But typically in a paragraph, you probably want all the lines to have the same space. Maybe different space between paragraphs, but you want the same space within the paragraph. The default preference of InDesign, if I go under the type preferences, is, notice this setting, apply leading to entire paragraph. Notice that's not checked. So it does not apply it to the entire paragraph. And that means that it applies it to each character. So if I select this and I maybe make the type a little bigger, and I make the box bigger so you can see everything in here. If I select the type and then I make the leading a specific amount, and then I make it bigger or smaller, let's say I make it smaller like that. You have to be careful if you have returns in your text. So let's say I have some more text down here. And I want to show the hidden characters. I'm going to go up to type and show hidden characters so you can see those. Let me move. It's a little bit hard to see here. I'm going to copy this into a new document real quick just so you can see this a bit better. Because, of course, my background is blue. So it's a little hard to see hidden characters here. There we go. All right, so now let's show hidden characters again in this file. There we go. All right, so now I put in a return, and that's what I want you to see here is that there's a return there. Okay, so all this I'm going to make 20 point with 30 point leading. So we can make this nice and big so everybody can see this all. Okay, so it's 20 point size, 30 point leading. Now let's say I select all of this, but I don't select that hidden return. So if I select all this and I make the leading less, you see what's happening to that last line. That last line, there's more space from here to here. That's because this one empty invisible character that you normally don't see, it remembers that it's 30 point leading, even though everything else in the line is only 18. The character with the biggest leading wins out for that line. So if that invisible character also got to be 18, then the entire line would be 18 because 18 is the biggest leading on that line. And that gets people all the time because it's an invisible character. And if you're selecting things, let me go back here. I make this all the 30 again. If you're selecting things, if you go from the start to the end, you might include that invisible character. But if you go from the end the other way, it actually does not select that invisible character. So depending on how you highlight the text, you may or may not get that special character. And it can lead to inconsistent leadings within your paragraph. It's really bad if you just make it like 1 point less and you don't even notice it because you're 1 point off. And it's, some people might notice it, but you might not if you're not paying really close attention. So anyway, I like to change the preference. Under Edit if you're on a PC or InDesign if you're on a Mac. You go into your type preferences, check this on. Now this will not fix your document, but it'll prevent that from happening in the future. Apply leading to entire paragraphs now. When I go to do this, and even if I just select a little bit in the paragraph now, I can actually set it for the entire paragraph because it's going to do it to the entire paragraph, but you'll never get that last line being a different leading because it has to do it now to the entire paragraph. It can't do it character by character. This is how I prefer InDesign to be set up, especially if you're doing paragraph type formatting. It's very, very useful. I think that's a better default personally for the way that I like to work. But I think it's very important to know how that works. That is an application preference. So, I'm sorry, I should say that's a kind of a document preference. So if you set it in one document, that's not going to set it in a different document. So if you go in and take a look at it, you might notice that even though I set it in the other one, it's not set here. So you do have to set that document by document, which means that if you want that to be your default, close all your files and then set that preference. And for every file that you create from then on, it'll have your default preference properly set. So just close all your files and then set it and you'll be fine for files you create. Unfortunately, if somebody else creates a document, when you get that document, it's going to retain their preference. So you might have to check when you open up the file, you might have to turn that on for a file you get that somebody else made and sent to you. So just be careful of that. Okay. So I'm going to make this like, maybe make that like 12 over 18. Okay. Now, if you don't want hyphenation, like in this case, I don't really need to hyphenate this text. I can just highlight this paragraph. Now, up here, we have character options and paragraph options. We have these two sections that we can switch between. Paragraph options are things like centering, right aligning, left aligning, things that have to be done to the whole paragraph. Character settings are things that could be done differently to each word. You could have a different font, a different size, that type of stuff. So let me go back to my paragraph options here, and you can uncheck hyphenate so it won't be hyphenating that paragraph. Okay. And so coming back to this, now I want to make the leading different. So I just click into that paragraph. You can highlight some if you want, but you could just click in there and just reduce that leading for that paragraph like so. I can turn off my hidden characters now. I don't need those, so I'll hide those hidden characters. Now, this color logo, we never swapped that out for the white one that I want to use. So let's swap that out. If you have a logo already there or a photo already there and you just want to replace it with something else, select the box and just place the new version in. It will replace it and it'll keep the same size and everything. It's really nice. You just place the new version in. So I have two files. I have one that's color and one that's not. I have a white one. Notice it kept the same size. It just swapped it out because both files are exactly the same size. They're just different color versions. And so even though I've scaled it in here since I originally brought it in, it matched the current size and it scaled the thing that I was bringing in appropriately so that my layout stayed the same essentially. It was really quite nice. Because in a box, you can only be linked to one graphic. So it's going to remove the old graphic and replace it with the new one. So now if I look at my links panel, I'm not linked to the color version anymore. I'm now linked to the white one instead. Okay. When I'm done with my layout, I might want to see what it looks like without all these guides that are distracting. So over here, click and hold on the bottom button, which is the preview button, and we can switch to a preview mode. Click and hold, we can switch back to normal. So in normal, you see all the box edges, you see the guides, but you can click and hold and switch to preview. And then you don't see your hidden characters, you don't see your box edges, you don't see your guides. You also don't see the bleed. Notice the bleed that was there. If I click and hold and switch back to normal, notice the bleed gets cut off because the bleed wasn't really meant to be part of the final trimmed piece. So this is showing you exactly how it's going to look in the final end once it's been outputted and trimmed down. When I mouse over that little button down there, notice it says preview, but in parentheses it says W. W is the key, as in preview. W goes in and out of preview mode. It's a wonderful thing. Get used to that keystroke. Just please don't do it when you're in a text box. You'll get lots of W's, and your editor will say, why are you putting all these W's in my text? And your editors will hate you for it. So be careful of that. As long as you're not in text, preview works. If you are in text, just make sure you hit escape to get out of text, and then you can hit W to go in and out of preview mode. You can totally work in preview mode if you want to. You don't have to work in the normal mode. But if you want to see things like guides and invisible characters, you have to hit the W to go back into the normal mode, and that's where you're going to see those things that don't print but can be useful. All right. Let me close this other document that I don't need. And we've now made an ad that I want to send to the printer. So maybe I want to print it myself first before I send it out. So how would we make an in-house print? Well, you just go to File, Print. And now I have an 8.5 by 11 plus a bleed. How am I going to print that? If I'm printing it in-house and I only have an 8.5 by 11 printer, unfortunately, most printers can't print to the edge of the paper. So you're a little bit stuck. You could, let's say you go to Setup, you could tile it onto a couple sheets of paper. You could, let's say I rotate this. So here it would actually split across 4 pieces of paper. But if I rotate, then at least I only get it on 2 sheets of paper. So that's not too bad. So you could do that. Or the other thing you could also do is instead of tiling it, you could just scale it to fit. It would be a little bit smaller, so the size won't be accurate. It would be 93%, so it's just a little bit smaller. But you could do that as well if you don't mind seeing it a little bit smaller than it would normally appear. That's another option that you could do. Or the other thing is, if you have access to a bigger printer, now in my case, this printer can't do a bigger version, but let's say you came in here and you had an 11 by 17 printer, you could choose your bigger piece of paper, and then it would print on a bigger sheet of paper, and you could just trim it down. Now, if you're going to trim it down, you're going to need the crop marks. So under marks and bleed, you can throw on crop marks, and then in the corners, it throws on the crop marks so that you can trim with a ruler and you'll cut off the bleed, because the bleed is being included right now. If you don't want to include the bleed, maybe you want to show a client a printout, but you don't want the bleed to be there because you're not going to cut it off. You don't have to include the bleed, but normally the bleed is going to be there if that's checked on. So, if you're not printing the bleed, you wouldn't need the crop marks. You could just print what's actually going to end up be the final kind of trim. But if you're going to include the bleed, definitely include the crop marks so you know where to trim. Otherwise, you don't know where the bleed ends. One important thing, regardless of what you're doing, is under advanced, there's this thing called transparency flattener. Anytime you have transparencies, which could be shadows that you add in InDesign, it could be transparent graphics you bring from Illustrator, and I'm talking about partially transparent. Like in my case, my logo has a transparent background, but there's no partial transparency, like a 50% transparency. So anytime there's partial transparency, InDesign has to render or flatten that transparency. And I wish they'd call it like transparency renderer, because they're rendering the transparency when it comes to print. They default to a medium resolution. Adobe says this is good enough for your average desktop printer. I disagree. I tend to find that there can be issues with medium resolution. I would always go with a high resolution, and there is a way that you can change the default. Let me cancel this. If you go into your print presets, you can define them. You can actually edit this default print preset. You just double click on it to edit it. You can come here and change this to high resolution, and when you hit OK, you will be changing your default from then on. You will always have the high resolution, so you won't have to think about it. So I would definitely advise that. I'm not going to do this in this case so that I can show other people. I want to be reminded that I have to show people that. But you could change that on your computer so that it always defaults to high quality and you never have to worry about that. Okay. So, and then you can print it and you can make sure it's good. And if you like it, then you're ready to send out to the printer. There's a couple ways you can send stuff out to a printer. If they say, just send me a PDF, well, you can export a PDF. Go to File, Export. Down here at the bottom, choose Adobe PDF Print. I'm going to put this into my folder here. Let me just throw it on my desktop. That's my name for the file up there, and we'll save. Now we get to see the options. Again, they default to this high quality print. Which one you choose here depends on how you're going to send it out. Personally, a lot of times what I would find that you do would probably be press quality or a PDF X1A. Let's take a look at the difference. So a PDF X1A, if you're not familiar with the X1A format, PDF, you can do anything in a PDF. You can have RGB art, you can have CMYK art, you can have fonts not embedded, you could have fonts embedded. There can be all sorts of good and bad stuff in a PDF, depending on the application that's writing it. Now, InDesign writes good PDFs for the most part. There's some pretty good defaults that we have here, but other apps can do anything under the sun, pretty much. So that can be a problem when you send something out to a printer. And so what the print industry said is, hey, we really want a standard that we can check against to say, if this is an X1A, it meets the following criteria. And just a couple of the criteria would be, stuff is CMYK. It's not RGB. Fonts are embedded. We have transparency already flattened, already rendered, so that we don't have to worry about that. So if you send a PDF X1A to a magazine, they can just run it through a verifier, make sure it's an X1A because it verifies. It's like a validation method that you can do in Acrobat. You can say, is this an X1A? And if it meets all the criteria, yep, it's an X1A. I know it's good to print. So that because they can validate it that it's an X1A, they just know that it's good to print. So that's why it's a good format to choose. If you look under compression, anything that's super high resolution, they'll cut down to 300, which is fine. Keeps your file sizes from getting too big, right? If you want crop marks and bleed, you'd have to choose that. They don't include it by default because not everything needs crop marks and bleed. If you have it like I do, I'd have to check on bleed and crop marks. Under advanced again, it's set to the high resolution flattener. Again, that's good. That's a good default. That's what we want. That's built into this preset. So really the only thing that you have to think about with this preset is, do I need to come in and add crop marks and bleed? The reason that the flattening happens at this point is because this is based on Acrobat 4, and that's before transparency was added to the Acrobat format, to the PDF format. So this PDF 1.3 didn't support live transparency. So we had to render it now rather than it being rendered in Acrobat when they print that. So that's one way you can send out the PDF, which would be good, especially if it's requested. Now, always talk to your printer. It's possible they might give you a preset to use, or they might give you a specific preset to use. Always talk to your printer first and ask them what they want. If they're not sure, you can use these recommendations that I'm giving you. Press quality, if we did press quality, what's the difference there? Well, that's based on a newer PDF standard, the 1.4. That's compatible with Acrobat 5. In Acrobat in the PDF 1.4, now notice that transparency is grayed out. We don't flatten it now. In Acrobat, they'll flatten it later. So it's going to be flattened. It just delays the flattening. So in this case, the PDF might actually be a smaller file size because it doesn't have to render it into the PDF. It can keep the transparency live, and when they open this up in Acrobat, the printer will set the flattening settings there. Unfortunately, the default flattening settings in Acrobat, unless they've changed, the default flattening settings used to be medium resolution, which was kind of a bad default. And if you got a printer that really didn't know what they were doing, they'd sometimes use the medium resolution for flattening, and you'd get some issues when you print things that have transparency. So because of that, you might not want to let it up to the printer, and that's what PDF X1A does. It just flattens it now instead of letting it open-ended and hoping that the printer does it on their end. So again, if your printer gives you specific settings to use or tells you a specific preset, go with their recommendation. They'll know their workflow and their output, but otherwise, PDF X1A is good, or potentially press quality is good for doing a print quality PDF. Now, if you're sending something to a client and you just want them to look at it, smallest file size might be good. Smallest file size does do live transparency, which keeps your file size smaller. Anything that is over 150 pixels per inch, it just cuts it down to 100. And it also does a low image quality. So your images might not look as good as they would look at like a high or maximum quality, but it's going to save on file size. Now, technically, they say smallest file size. They should have said small file size, because you could go even smaller. Let's say your file's got tons of images and it's just still too big to email, and you want to make it a size that you can email. You could cut that down to even 72 pixels per inch for these things and go even smaller. If that still doesn't work, you could go even down to the minimum image quality. Now, the lower the quality, the worse it's going to look, so keep that in mind. But there are ways you could get it even smaller if smallest file size is still too big. But it's a good place to start for your presets. I'm going to make a press quality one, so I'm going to go with the PDF X1A. It's going to go to a magazine. A lot of magazines want a PDF X1A so they can verify that it's ready to print. And I want all my pages. And let's view this PDF after I export it to make sure it looks nice. Export. We wait a moment, and it opens up, and there we go. We have our PDF, and it looks nice. Cool. That's one thing you can do if you just want to send out a PDF. Let me toss that out. Now, what if you want to send the native InDesign file? Oh, this every once in a while comes up because Adobe has this new publish online thing. I'm not interested in that right now, so I'm just going to close that. What if the printer says, well, give me a PDF, but also I want the native InDesign file just in case I need to change something or we need to fix something. They might want the native InDesign file. So I'm going to save my file before I proceed, and I'm going to package it up. Kind of like you package something to send it by the mail, or you're going to ship something UPS or FedEx. We're going to package up this to send it to the printer. And this can package everything that you need. This gives you a little report on some of the stuff that you did in the document in case you're interested. I'm just going to click through package. You can fill in your contact information here if you want. I kind of doubt that any printer actually looks at this information because it's not like you're actually printing this little text file out, but it actually creates a text file with stuff. Most of the time I just put these instructions in an email rather than in this file. So I just click through that. All right, what we're getting here is that it's going to, I'm going to put this on my desktop. It's going to copy fonts, all except for Chinese, Japanese, and Korean. There's something different about those fonts. You're going to have to custom copy them yourself. It won't collect those for you. And typekit fonts are fonts that you get from the typekit service. Now your printer also has the capability of getting those fonts from typekit, so you don't need to give them the fonts. When you open up the file, when the printer opens this file up, it would automatically give them the option to load those fonts from typekit. So they don't need to come from you, they'll come from typekit. So they don't need to copy the typekit fonts. It'll copy the linked graphics. And in this new package that they're going to create, they're going to update the links so that it points to the files that are in the package rather than pointing to the original design files. So basically it's making like a complete copy, and it's self-contained, that it's pointing to these new versions of the file rather than your originals. Now, an IDML file is an InDesign markup language file, and this is a file that somebody could open up in an earlier version of InDesign. So sometimes printers will say, make sure you give me an IDML file because maybe you have CC 2017 and they only have CC 2015. And they won't be able to open up your 2017 file in 2015. If you give them an IDML file, they can open up the IDML file and they'll be able to open it up in 2015. The only danger in that, though, is that if you used a new feature in 2017, when they open up that IDML file, it's possible it'll look different in 2015. So unless you have to do that, I actually kind of like to not do that. And then if they ask for it, then I know that they're going to be using an older version of InDesign. And I know I have to be more diligent in checking the proofs because something might have changed if they have to go back to an older version of InDesign and print with the older version. That should be less of a problem now with the Creative Cloud because they can automatically update for free. And so there's really no excuse now for the printer to not upgrade InDesign as far as they have free access to it. It's possible that their RIP software might need to be updated or something. That possibility of why they might have some sort of incompatibility on their system. They might not be able to upgrade until they upgrade the RIP software. So anyway, but you could include that if you want to. You can also include a printable PDF as well, which is nice. The only thing is that you do have to use one of the presets. So for example, you could use the PDF X1A preset. Now that's fine if you don't need the crop marks, remember? If you're doing something where you need crop marks, you'd actually have to go make a preset with crop marks so that you could choose it here. Otherwise, you would first collect it and then you could make a PDF manually. But if you've got a preset that's ready to go, this can package the native files and it can even make the PDF, which is really nice. So it's going to put everything in a folder. I just click package. They say, don't do illegal things with fonts. You say, I won't. All right, let's go check out. And no, I don't want to publish online. Thank you, Adobe. All right, let's go check it out. Here's my folder. Here's my InDesign file. Here's the document fonts that were used. Here's that instructions file that I didn't bother filling out. Here's the PDF. Now, here's the cool thing. When the printer opens this up, because there's a document fonts folder, InDesign will automatically load those fonts in that document fonts folder. So the printer won't even have to open and activate those fonts. They just open up the file and auto activates those fonts. If fonts were loaded from Typekit, it'll say, hey, we're missing some fonts that are on Typekit. Do you want to sync them? They click sync and it downloads the fonts. So then they have all the fonts they need. They have all the links that are in here. Everything's there. So everything's ready to go. They just open it up and they're ready to go if they need to use the native file. But the PDF's there that they can print from the PDF file if they want to. Okay. So that's how you can package it up to send it out to someone. Now, as far as other features, we have a little bit more time that we can go into some other features as well. So let's talk about doing some bigger type styling. Let's say you want to start to lay out a book that has multiple pages. I'm going to create a new document. And let's say we're going to do a file that is a small little more handheld book, maybe 5.5 inches by 9.5 inches. I'm going to choose one page because I'm going to let InDesign create the additional pages for me. This is a facing page document because I'm going to have a left and a right-hand page in my book. I'll start on page number 1. It's a good place to start books. I do want a primary text frame. This is going to put a text frame in the margin area of my page. And when I place text into that primary text frame, it's going to automatically flow across pages and insert as many pages as are necessary to reveal all the text. Because I'm going to have a lot of text coming in, and I want it to create all the pages automatically. That primary text frame will make that work. I only need 1 column for this design, but I could do more if I wanted to. I do want to have some margins. Let's say I want to do 0.625 all the way around. This is going to be a cheaper to print book, so we're not going to do bleeds. We're going to keep the cost down, so we're not going to bleed this. So we're going to type in 0 for the bleed to keep costs down. All right, click Create. Here we have our margins. We have a single page. If I look here in the Pages panel, we have the 1 page. But if I click here, notice that there is a text box. That's the primary text frame. If I place text into there, when it reaches the end, it will automatically create another page and link those text boxes. With that text box selected, I'm going to place text into it. And this is where I have a text file. It's not a super long text file, but it's a bit longer. Now I know these are plain text files, but you can also place in rich text files, which are RTF files. You can also place in Word files. You can also place Excel files if you have tables. So you can place in a variety of Office documents as well. But I just have plain text, so there's no text styling associated with it. I'm going to place that in, and if I give this a moment, notice that it automatically created another spread. Like I said, there's not a lot of text in here, just a little bit extra, because it reached the end of page 1 and said, oh, I need more. And you have a primary text frame. So I'll automatically create another page, and I'll fill that out. Oh, wait, I have more. Let me create another page and fill that out. Oh, I don't have extra, so I'll stop. And it threads them all together, which is very nice that it did that. So if I use my type tool and I select through, notice that those are all threaded together as one chain of text. Very nice. Now let's do some type styling in here. We have main headings and subheadings and regular paragraphs. Down below here, we have another main heading, subheading, and some paragraphs. Main heading, subheading, and some paragraphs. I'd like to create some type styles across this book. I know in here I just have a few of them, but in a real book, you might have hundreds or thousands of headings, and you want them to all look the same. And more importantly than looking the same is if you need to make a change to that many, you want it to globally update. So you want consistency of design, but you also want easy editing. And so for that, we have styles for our type. Okay, so what you do for styles is you make one example so InDesign can turn that example into a style. Let's apply some type styling to this. I want to do Georgia italic. Notice that as I arrow through this list, it actually previews the font that I'm working with. That's nice. I like that one. And I'm going to make this bigger. And then down below here, this I want to do as, let's do Arial bold. And I'm going to make that all caps. And I'm going to make that smaller. And we need some color in this. So let's add some color. I'm going to select this, go over here to my swatches. I want to create a new color. So I'm going to click the new color button, new swatch. I'm going to double click on that. And let's dial in a color here. Let's make like an orange. I'm going to call this orange. Okay, that looks good. Okay. So now we have our orange color. And this I want to make a lighter gray. So it's already black. I'm just going to tint it back so that it's a gray. Let's tint it back to like 50%. Make that just a tiny little bit smaller, like so. Okay, that's looking a little bit better. Now we just have a regular paragraph that we need to design. So I'll take one of these paragraphs, and I want to use the same Georgia typeface. We'll just do Georgia regular. We'll make that a little bit smaller and give it some more leading. And we'll give it a touch more leading here. Okay, so that's how I want all of my document to look between these 3 styles. Now I need to actually make them styles. Under the type menu, we have paragraph and character styles. We'll just do paragraph styles. Notice that I just have this basic paragraph style, which is how my text looked by default. I can select a little bit of the text as a sample, and to create a style with that text selected, just click the New Style button. It'll take my selected appearance of text and save it as a style. Then I can come in and double click on it and give it a name. I'll call this heading, and you can see that it's saved in my Georgia italic and color orange. If you ever want to make changes, you can go through the different settings here and change anything about the text that you want. Click OK. Let's do this again. We select a little bit of the text, or just clicking into the line is good enough as long as you're surrounded by the text formatting. You can highlight a little bit or just click. Either one is fine. We're going to click once more to create a second style, and that is now the subhead style. Now, if you double click, you bring that up. If you click and pause for a moment on that, that's another way to rename. Just click and pause, and you can rename it right there. So I'll call this the subheading. You can actually rearrange these guys into the order that you use them rather than alphabetical order. I'm going to click into this regular text and create one more style. Click to create the last style. Click on the name of the style and click one more time and pause so I get an editable name. And I'll just call that text. Now I can go through, and anything that's unstyled that I want to style, I can click on it and say, hey, that's a heading, or that's a subheading, or that's text. I know everything is text for the most part, except for a few things that are headings and subheads. So I'm going to save some time by doing a select all and making it all text. That way I don't have to worry about applying that style to anything else. Then I can come back in and click into the heading and say that's a heading. I can click into the subheading and say that's a subheading. Notice I don't have to highlight the whole paragraph. This is a paragraph style. It must apply to the entire paragraph regardless of your selection. You can select a word, but it is not a character style. It is a paragraph style. Therefore, it must apply to the entire paragraph. So click into the heading, click on my style. Click into the heading or subheading, click on my style. Pretty cool. Makes really quick work of applying these things. I don't have to remember all the settings, and it's creating a consistent design. Nice. Now, I definitely noticed some issues here. Like, I need some more space above this, and I need a lot more space above this so I can really separate the headings. I'm going to zoom back out so I can get a better sense of the page. And I'm going to hit the W key to go into preview. Remember that that's like going over here and choosing preview, but I'm going to hit the W key to do that. I want more space above those headings. So with nothing selected, because I don't want to apply this style, I'm going to double click on the heading style to edit it. I can come here to spacing, check on preview, and go here to space before and add some more space before all of those headings. Very nice. I can double click on subhead. Again, preview's already checked now that I turned it on, and I can add just a little bit more above the subhead, and that looks better. My type, the text style that I have, it's really hard to know where paragraphs are because there's no space between paragraphs. So I will also double click on the type styling, the text style, and check on spacing there, and I'll put space after each paragraph, like so. Now I can see where the different paragraphs are. The text is automatically reflowed throughout this text chain of boxes, this thread of boxes, and is looking quite nice. So those are styles in a nutshell. I know there's definitely a lot more things to learn about InDesign. There's things like dealing with pages, inserting pages, master pages, linking text boxes. I know this was done automatically. There's ways to manually link them. So there's all sorts of more features that exist in InDesign, but we are running out of time for it today. I do want to take a few minutes to answer some questions for those people that are attending live. While you're thinking about those questions and typing them into the chat, I do want to leave you with one fun little thing. It is a useless thing in InDesign, but it is fun, and hey, anything that's fun isn't completely useless, right? So there's a little Easter egg, and Easter eggs are like little hidden things in software. And back in Quark, for anybody that had used Quark or heard about it, Quark was a page layout program that a lot of people used before InDesign came along. InDesign was so much better than Quark. But anyway, Quark had a famous little alien who would, actually it was like a little alien robot that would come out and destroy things in the document if you hit a keystroke. Well, to kind of poke fun at that, InDesign added a friendly alien into InDesign. Purely, this is just a fun little thing in InDesign. It's a neat little Easter egg. It's a hidden thing. If you go into print and you save a preset called friendly alien, capital F, capital A, you gotta spell alien, right? Friendly alien, and you click on the preview, the friendly alien will come out. Now, he is friendly, so keep an eye out. Watch him. He's going to come out and he's going to wave. He only waves for a moment. Here he comes. There's the wave, and he's gone. So anytime you want to bring out your friend, even if you're on the default settings here, you can go to the friendly alien preset, and you can click on here, and you can bring out your friend anytime you want. So never say you don't have a friend in InDesign. You do. All right. We do have a question in the chat. Please tell us about InDesign's panels. So for all of Adobe apps like InDesign, Illustrator, Photoshop, they all have these dockable panels over here. And they can be expanded or collapsed. Like in this case, these are collapsed, so I could open and close them by clicking these buttons. This one is expanded, but I could collapse it if I want to. This tiny little arrow up here collapses this to an icon. And that makes it one that you can pop open or closed. If you click on this button, you can expand it. Now, you can rearrange these things by dragging these maybe to this column, so you only have one column, so you can open and close these whenever you want. Within this column, only one of them is going to be open at a time when they are collapsed like this. You can expand it so that you can see all the panels at the same time, but a lot of times I keep those collapsed to save some screen space, and then I just pop into it when I want and close it when I don't. Once you get used to these icons, and eventually you will, you won't need these text labels. You can actually shrink that down to just icons, and one click in, one click out. It just takes a little time to get used to these icons. The default workspace is called Essentials. I actually like to use the Advanced as a starting point. The Essentials really doesn't show you too many panels. I like to switch to the Advanced as kind of a starting point because at least those show you paragraph styles and character styles, which I find are useful. Don't be scared by the Advanced. It doesn't make it harder to use. It just shows a few more panels by default. Another question is, when would you use layers in InDesign? Unlike Photoshop, which is a very layer-oriented program, and here, let me just, since I'm just going to kind of talk a little bit here, I'll pop in my video. Photoshop is very layer-oriented. Every object is a different layer in Photoshop. In Illustrator and InDesign, it's an object-oriented program. So each object you have is a separate element. And you just click on an object, and that's selected. If you have another element, which would be like another layer in Photoshop, that automatically goes on top by default. You can send things to the back, bring them to the front, do all that type of stuff, all within the current layer. You have layers, but layers are kind of like a group. So in Photoshop, you have groups. In InDesign, you have layers. Same thing in InDesign and Illustrator are the same in this sense. You can open up that layer and see what's inside of it. If you have very simple layouts, sometimes you don't need to use layers. You're still having layered objects that you can manipulate, but you don't necessarily have to have different layers. Reasons you might want to have layers are for making some things easier to work with. For example, in my ad, maybe I'd want to put the photo on a different layer. So I could create a new layer, double click on this and call it photo. I'd put the photo layer on the bottom. Now, right now there's nothing in there. So if I open these guys up, right now my Photoshop document is in layer 1. I could drag that down into the other layer. Now, why might you want to separate these things? Well, because you could lock that layer very easily. You could also hide and show that layer very easily. So by locking that, now I can work over top of the photo without working with it. Now, that said, you can still lock objects. So even if I didn't have a separate layer, if I just had that object up here, you can still lock that without having to create another layer. But it might be easier if you have one or more items as a background, and that way you don't have to drill down in. This is a very simple document. You might have a ton of different things here to see. It might be just nicer to lock it as a layer. Also, hiding and showing a whole layer of things can sometimes be useful, but it's not something where I'm creating a bunch of different layers. Like in Photoshop, you have to create layers to keep things separate. In InDesign, everything is separate elements, so it's automatically kept separate. Layers are purely organizational, really. So InDesign is making objects as you work. Photoshop is just so different because the layer that Photoshop makes is like an object here. So yeah, you can't work on a single layer per se in Illustrator and in InDesign. You can't do that in the sense like a Photoshop layer. Like in Photoshop, you can work everything on one layer and they're not separate elements. They're all flat, and it's a really bad thing. You want to create in Photoshop different layers so they're different elements. In InDesign, the layer concept isn't the same layer as a layer in Photoshop. When you open up a layer in InDesign, you have different objects. So each object is like a layer in Photoshop, and InDesign automatically creates a new object for each thing. So in Photoshop, you can create layer groups. So a layer in InDesign is like a layer group in Photoshop. An object is like a layer in Photoshop. So just like in Photoshop, you don't have to use layer groups, but you might want to. You don't have to use layers in InDesign unless you want to. InDesign is automatically going to create objects which are equivalent to layers in Photoshop. So it's kind of automatically dealt with. It's a different mindset than Photoshop. So Illustrator and InDesign work the same in terms of layers and objects. Photoshop is the one that's the odd man out. That's the one that's different. As I leave a little bit more time for some questions here for the people that are attending live, I did just want to mention that if you want to learn more, we have both a class or a workbook that you might want to take. And again, these are things that you can attend in person in New York City, or you can attend live online. We have a beginner to intermediate course that is a full course. It's a 3-day course, or if you take it at night, it's a 3-week course, and it comes with a workbook. We have some upcoming dates that you can check out, but we often we have this class regularly, so it keeps going on. So if you're watching this as a recording, just check out for our website for the latest dates. It comes with the workbook if you take this class, but this is an 18-hour course split over 3 days or 3 weeks if you're doing it at night, 3 days if you're doing it during the day. If you want something a little bit less, you could do the InDesign in a day, and that's just a 6-hour class. And that's either in one day, or sometimes we offer it at night, and it will be 2 nights. Also comes with a workbook as well. If you just want to focus on style sheets, we have an InDesign Style Spectacular, and you can check that out if you want to do just focus on style sheets. There's a lot more that we can do in style sheets, and there's some really cool things that I show in that seminar, including some really cool secret tips. I've never, ever seen anybody do some of the override techniques that I've learned. I didn't come up with them. Scott Carson, the founder of Noble Desktop, he showed me these many years ago, and I've never met anybody that knew that. And I was like, how did you figure that out? And he's like, I just knew. He had figured it out in Quark, and it still applies to InDesign. He's like, I just figured it out. Like, I know how it works, and I figured this out. I'm like, why does nobody else know this? Such a cool thing. Like, you have to take the seminar for that if you work in style sheets. I will blow your mind with how to deal with overrides. It's really cool stuff. If you can't take the class, if you take the class online, you do have to attend live. It's not a recorded situation. It's you attend live with everybody else. So some people come to the class and some people attend online. If you can't do that, you can also check out our books. So for example, we have an InDesign book here, and you can check that out, and you can get that as either an ebook or a print version as well. And so that's the next best thing to taking the class. It's step-by-step exercises going through learning more about InDesign. We cover all sorts of things. If you want to see exactly what we teach, you can check out the table of contents there. We have a question about why did I ask about Quark Express? What is Quark Express? Quark Express is a program that is just like InDesign, but made by a different company. Quark Express used to be the de facto standard that everybody used before InDesign came out. And then InDesign came out, and it was a better version of Quark. Adobe just made the first version wasn't ready yet, but starting with the second version, I started using InDesign. It really took until like about the fourth version of InDesign for the industry to say, "Hey, this is better than Quark was." And so Adobe created it was another page layout program just like Quark Express was, but it was better. But Quark everybody used Quark. It had like a complete monopoly on the page layout industry. Everybody used Quark. But it was many years ago, so fewer and fewer people were Quark users. Now, there's very few people still using Quark today. There are still people using Quark. It's still around. They're still selling it, but definitely InDesign is way better. As soon as I could switch off Quark to InDesign, I did it in a heartbeat. All right, well, it looks like there's no more questions in the chat, so just want to say thank you for coming, everybody. If you like this video, click the thumbs up button down below the video, and be sure to subscribe. There's also a subscribe button, and you'll get notified of future videos. For anybody that attended live today, we'll send you out a link to watch this recording back, but it's also going to be posted as a YouTube video once we do the editing to remove some of the beginning stuff when we were just waiting for people. So just want to say thanks for everybody. Thanks everybody for coming, and hope you enjoyed, and hopefully we'll see you around Noble Desktop or in a future live stream. And please tell other people if they want to learn InDesign to come check out this video and check out some of our seminars and our training. Thanks a lot, everybody, and have a great day.